Well, hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Jason Levine. Thank you so much for joining me today on the Friday Masterclass, where hopefully I didn't just put my audio out of sync. Guess we'll see. And today is a bit of a grab bag show because we're going to be going over some hidden gems, largely an Audition. I saw one just now come up in Premiere. It's probably going to be a little two-parter series. I like to do these every now and again because I just happened to run into some of these things myself this past week, and it made me realize and just further emphasized why I continue to love working in Audition for specifically very deep sort of, I say high-end, I don't even know what that means anymore, but somewhat esoteric, but very detailed audio workflows that involves things like just very, working with odd sample rates, doing very transparent conversions, removing DC offset, batch processing a series of files, dealing with raw media. A lot of apps will do this, but maybe it's just like it's not really clear how it all works. Audition has a lot of that stuff in there, so we may hit a couple of the ones in Premiere along the way, but I'm probably going to focus most of today on audio because I'm in an audio mood. So hope all of you are doing well. Of course, we're coming to you live on YouTube, Behance, Twitter, Twitch, somewhere else is what LinkedIn. So thank you so much for joining. My iPad just it died, and I've been trying to bring it back to life so I can get my commenting monitor here. In the meantime, I see we've got Esteban Toro. Oh, thank you. Audio is good. Omer Sahinovich. Quintessential Studios, digging the studio. Thank you very much. Mikhail Bowman, great studio. Thank you. Bamboo, how are you doing? David Lewis. All right. Oh, and I will get to your question in just a second, David. And let's see if we can get over to the Behance chats, where I see we've got Cody Bear in there. Hold on. Segueing over. And who else have we got in here? As it comes in slowly. It's at 1%. The iPad. Paloma Dora, hey, how's it going? Gino Marbella, Theo, Oliver Andrews. All right, nice to see you all. And thank you for those joining on LinkedIn as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and since David just happened to ask this question. So David Lewis just asked, I've got a question I can't find the answer to. How can you precisely move audio, say, exactly 2 frames, for example? Guess there must be a precise way. And indeed there is. Now, you could do this in both, of course, Audition and Premiere. This will give me an opportunity, I guess, to show both. I don't know which you're referring to, David, so you can chime in, but I'm going to show both of them anyway. So let me go ahead and switch my screen over. Okay. So if you are, in fact, doing this in Premiere, again, very easy to do. And I've shown, actually, this is another one of those hidden gem things. So obviously, we're always natively working in frames in Premiere in video. Now, just to sort of cut ahead here real quickly, you're always working in frames, but you do have other options. Now, obviously, when we're working with straight ahead music, generally, I mean, I'm not going against sort of frame time code unless there's a video component. So of course in Audition you can change the timeline to reflect 23976, 24, 25, 30, whatever. I think you can even do custom frame rates in there. So Premiere, we're typically always working in frames. So if you just want to move audio in Premiere by X number of frames, it's actually quite easy and effortless because Premiere will automatically, you can only snap your audio in frames because that's what it's meant to do. You have to have snapping enabled, but it should always work this way. Actually, I don't even think you need snapping enabled for audio unless you make a change, which I'll show you in a second. So here I have this little Masterclass promo piece here. Now, currently I've got the audio and video linked. So I'm just going to unlink these momentarily so I can just show this to you. And you can see that we are in frames in this case. I think this is a 23976 timeline. Hold on, let's put the project panel up here. What is this? Just video. Oh, it's a 30 frame timeline. Okay, doesn't really matter. All right, so without doing anything in Premiere, so you see the frame indicators up above, all right? If I just move the audio, I can be imprecise. It's always going to snap it to a frame. And you can actually see the little tooltip indicator down below, how many frames I'm moving back to front. So without doing anything, it's impossible to not land on a subframe. In fact, if I take the snapping off, yeah, it still does it for the audio clip, okay? It just won't snap to other audio clips with that snapping off. And that's by design. You're always working in frames. Now, if you want to move in subframes on the Premiere side, and this is one of those little hidden gems, although this can be a dirty, nasty one, so you must be careful. In the flyout menu, or the hamburger, in the Impossible Burger menu, I don't know, we have this show audio time units. Now, I've fought with them over years. Actually, I haven't fought with them over the years. I complained about this over the years. Audio time units. Okay. What it's actually showing you are samples. So you are now in samples per second, which corresponds to the sample rate of your session, of your project, which 9 times out of 10 in Premiere, unless you're doing some very specific 96K surround mix or something like that, or prepping sound, which you're going to hand off to someone to do a Atmos or whatever mix elsewhere, you're probably working in 48K. So that's what this 5-digit character is representing. And then once you do that, now you're in subframe level. So you can move this, and you can see as I move it around, if you're looking at the tooltip below, we're actually moving in samples. Okay? Now, obviously, if you're trying to get very, very precise, I'm zoomed in here, you're going to want to continually zoom in. Now, remember, there are 48,000 of those samples per second. So if you need to just do an off, what am I trying to say? If you're trying to do a subframe move with your audio in Premiere, you can do that, but keep in mind, it can be a little imprecise. You have to be sort of zoomed in fairly, because you can see now it is actually moving at the sub sample level here really accurately, but you got to be zoomed in a bit. If you're fully zoomed out, you're not going to see anything, and if you're kind of zoomed in a little, the increments are too large. Can you see I'm moving in like 50, 60 sample increments? So you want to kind of get down to a fairly small zoomed level. Again, it depends how much you're trying to move. Remember, 48,000 samples per second. If you move it 5 samples, is it going to change sync? No, not 5. 5,000 over time-ish. I don't know what that percentage is. It's about 1/10. So yeah, eventually you'd be kind of 1/10 of a second off, but you get the idea. So that's how you do it in Premiere. Main thing about this, about going into audio units, I have to say it. What does that mean? Audio time units. I can't help myself. Turn it off when you're done doing that, because what'll happen is you'll forget, and now anytime you move audio, you'll be like, oh, I'm just going to snap this to this frame over here. It's not snapping to frames. It's at some arbitrary sample level now, and now you're going to run into trouble, because now it's not even a matter of sync so much, it's just stuff's not going to line up. You're going to snap things improperly. It's going to get really weird. So if you go into audio time units to do subframe snapping, just make sure you turn that off, okay? All right, now, bouncing over to the Audition side, how do you do the same thing? Basically the same. As I mentioned, here we are, I think in general, the default is, the time code is hours, minutes, seconds, right? So in this case, yes, and then milliseconds is what we're looking at here in this counter, in the counter area. So this is the default timeline. To change that to frames, I'm going to simply right-click, Control-click, go into Time Display, and let's go into, let's say, here, a SMPTE 30, okay? And then we also want to, because it is not enabled by default, to enable snapping to frames. So now if I zoom in on this, and you're seeing individual frames here, as I move the audio, it is snapping to those frames. Okay? Super easy. This also is particularly important if you send a session over from Premiere to Audition and you want to start moving things around. You don't want to be in HMS or some flavor thereof, I think actually when you send the session from Premiere to Audition, it automatically sets, I know it does, it automatically sets the time code display to the relative time code in Premiere. It does do that. So you don't have to worry about it, but it won't necessarily be snapping to the frame. So you will, I believe, have to enable that. And that's just a right click, control click on the timeline ruler up there, okay? Makes sense? All good? Okay. Technically called the panel menu, not the hamburger menu. Thank you, Kevin. But still, audio time units. All I can think about is Guardians of the Galaxy when I hear that. And all I can think about how that doesn't actually say anything or tell you what that really means. Okay, how do I really feel? All right, so let's get into some of the nerdier, esoteric-y, interesting-y things that we're going to do in here. Okay. Oh, and Gina has a question. When I send my audio from Premiere to Audition, if I'm not mistaken, it doesn't update automatically like a dynamic link. The audio will not if you make a change. So if you send a session, send to Audition from Premiere, and you send the entire sequence, it will dynamically link the video. So the video is always live. So what that means is you're mixing sound to picture in Audition, and you've got Premiere open, and you're like, oh, I'm going to add a color grade, or I'm going to add a title. I'm going to do something to the video itself. That will update in real time, and that will be reflected. That's a change. But it's a one-way dynamic link for video, and effectively, it's a one pass to Audition for essentially finishing or mixing to mix it back. If you make a cut to the video and you remove some of the audio, the video will change in Audition, but the audio won't shift in time. So it's not a dynamic link in that sense. So yes, again, you can't make any, you're assuming that that duration of the timeline you're sending to Audition is locked. The picture doesn't have to be locked. That can be, you can grade, you can add, again, you can do overlays, titles, whatever you want on top of the video. That will change dynamically in real time. But the audio itself is not going to be reflected back in Premiere. And if you, let's say, that's fine, we're not changing the duration of anything. We just want to do some basic mixing here, maybe use some of Audition's native effects, whatever, some other things that aren't in Premiere, and then send that back. Or maybe you just like doing the mix in here. Again, especially if you're doing sound design, it's just a lot easier to work with the interface. Once you're done with that, you can see that you have an export to Premiere Pro option here. And then from there, you can choose if you're going to send everything back as a stem or as a mixed file, or again, you could theoretically do both one at a time. The key here is that you're sending back as a stem. So what that means is, in the case of, say, this edit that you see here, let's say this came from Premiere. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, edited clips in here based on that video. All of this will come back to Premiere as just one continuous stem with whatever associated effects and EQs and things that you've applied to it. You won't have those individual clips as they exist like that anymore. You can still have them in the Premiere timeline. Again, it's not doing like render replace. They're still there. You can minimize them. You can delete them out, but they're still in Premiere as they existed. But it will be returned to Premiere as everything as its own stem or stereo mono 5.1 interleaved wave file. Okay? Omer, we need beat grid in AA. I mean, I'm with you, my friend. I know. Once we had it. Okay. So does that make sense, Gino? So after you have to export it back to Premiere. Correct. Well, the idea, if I'm being honest, the idea really is, for instance, I did a sound design thing here where I was doing this boxing thing. So the video was done, graded, excellent, perfect. But all the sound design I did here, and it was, hundreds of little timed clips against markers. So I effectively finished it here. I didn't send anything back to Premiere. Now, I ultimately did in the end because I wanted all the stems of the sound design back in the Premiere project just so I could show it there. But when you do an export from Audition with video, again, you can see you can go directly to Media Encoder. You don't have to go back. So the only reason you'd go back is, okay, I have now the mixed sound from Audition, but now I'm gonna, which the mix is perfect, but now I'm going to further do a cut down or something like that. That's why you'd go back. Really, the way the workflow exists today is, it's sort of, again, it's really a one pass. You're basically sending it to Audition to finish, with the option to go back, but you have to render. But then you get doubled tracks, Gino says. Well, that's what I said. Yes, your originals still exist in Premiere. They're still there. And if you bring everything in as stems, let's say you sent 30 tracks to Audition, well, yes, now you will have 60. So you delete them. Or you send back a stereo file. Now, again, if the duration is locked, we're getting very deep into this, but Gino, since you're asking, if the duration is locked, just send a stereo or a 5.1 file back to Premiere Pro. Because then, as you, again, treat the video, do things, overlays, whatever you're doing, you're like, you know what? In this scene, the voice is a little quiet. You can edit original on the stereo wave, and it will reopen the full session with all of the pieces, not stems, all of the individual clips, and then you can do a new stereo mix and overwrite, if you so desire, back into the Premiere timeline, so that you're only dealing with one stereo clip, one interleaved 5.1 clip, whatever. That would be the other way to do it. No, don't be sorry. That's a great question. Again, it's kind of, you know, I wish it were a full dynamic link. Where did you learn all these softwares? Bamboo. Where? Mostly in hotel rooms on the road. You know, just by using them every day for years. That's the honest truth. Okay, so I want to talk about a couple of things that, again, make Audition in particular a supremely useful editing and processing audio tool. I know we got David Lewis in here who does a lot of audio and is a believer, as it were. Again, it doesn't do a lot of things that some other DAWs do. I do everything in here, but, you know, primarily, even if we can just get you to use it for editing and sort of sound design and conversions and a lot of things I'm going to show you, it's great for that. So one of the things first that I'm going to do is do a little bit of sort of batch processing and creating a script, okay, to apply to multiple files. Now, you could do this for audio files meant to be in a Premiere project. You could do this for sound design files. You could do this for, let's say, you have a bunch of dialogue and you want to destructively process them. Now, that doesn't mean overwrite the originals. It just means I'm going to commit to making a bunch of changes. Because let's say you got a bunch of files and all of your dialogue, it's all at, you know, -15 and it's all ADR, and you want to give everything a little bit of ambience or a little bit of EQ or a little bit of something, and you want to normalize it to a specific, and you want to do this for all of those files. You can do that really easily and very, very quickly here by creating a script. So what I have to sort of showcase that, so I have a whole bunch of snare files. So I may have told you, I can't get into too much detail, but I'm working on a very a personal project with a dear, dear friend to bring a series of classically recorded samples back to life. And I can't go into any more detail than that. But these are all samples that, by the way, were recorded digitally, some in the late 70s. You heard that right. The remainder of them in the 80s. And then further converted, sort of updated to an early 90s digital standard, combination of Sound Designer 2, but many of them were just stored in that era, early 90s, as raw PCM data. So I have a couple of these already imported here. Also worth pointing out, based on the system that these were recorded into, it used a 50 kilohertz sample rate, not 48. So as mentioned, Audition allows you to have effectively any sample rate. I think we cap it now at 192, but in this case, these original samples were recorded at 50 kilohertz, not 48, not 88.2, which is standard today, 50. So you can do that in Audition. And these that you're seeing, they're all 16-bit stereo. And you can see when you see the source format, it comes in as a library sound file, raw data, 16-bit PCM. Okay, so let me just, I can kind of play a couple of these for you here. They're all very quiet, some quieter than others. Okay. So what I'd like to do, just by looking at a couple of these here, I'd like to normalize them. Again, some are a little bit louder. This one here seems to be peaking just under clipping. So again, I'm using my friend amplitude statistics. I've shown you this panel a million times. This file is particularly hot, just below 0 dB. If we go to this one here, scan it. This one's at like just about -4, 4.5, -5. But one thing I'm noticing is that all of these files have a little bit of DC offset. Now, it's fractional. You can see 0.02%, positive -0.01% on the other channel. So what that means effectively is that we've got an asymmetrical waveform, or to break it down more, we have some amplitude displacement. And this was not uncommon. Well, it's not uncommon in recording in general, but particularly in the sort of early digital days, when you potentially were working with a combo of sort of analog digital gear and doing transfers and recording, you may have ended up with sort of these voltage offsets, which could affect your waveform, in this case, positively or negatively. And the problem is when you have DC offset present, a number of things can happen. Now, this is a very small amount, but again, it can lead to things like clipping, distortion, and also something that's sort of key to today. And you can still encounter DC offset even without sort of faulty, bad equipment or anything like that. It can also limit your overall amplitude. And it's worth pointing out that it still exists today. In fact, not even so long ago, now this is going back a ways, but if you remember like the old Sound Blaster cards, PC, hands up if you remember Sound Blasters in the chats, okay? Sound Blasters notoriously they were inexpensive. So not great electronics inside of a, rumbling, Pentium, that's how long ago we're talking, Pentium 2, you would often encounter DC offset. Even today, with some of the sort of cheaper sound cards interfaces, sometimes they produce DC offset. It's just not real clean circuitry. And again, you may have voltage changes. Even as the power supplies begin to die, I had this recently on a nicer Focusrite, but the power supply was going, and I was noticing everything I was recording was having some DC offset issues. I go to grab the power brick, the thing was like on fire, and then I noticed I hadn't even been paying attention. Like the lights were flickering intermittently. Like, okay, well, that's a problem. I had to eliminate using that. So I want to get rid of DC offset. I want to normalize everything to kind of the same relative level, maybe -3. And then, again, just to add to the mix, maybe I will do something like add an EQ, and then maybe I'll add some reverb. So the idea is that I'm going to create a script or a favorite, or for those familiar in the Photoshop space, a macro that applies multiple steps to a file all at one time. And you do that by essentially going into those specific effects and running them in real time. And it builds the script for you. So if you heard scripting, that sounds intimidating. It's not. It's actually just as easy as applying things in a single step. So here's what I want to do. So let's see. Let's do a normalize, a DC offset removal, and let's just add reverb. We'll just keep it simple, okay? So that's what we're going to do. So I'm going to start with this file here. This is the basis for us creating the script. So I'm going to go up to my favorites menu here. All right. And at the bottom of the favorites menu, you will see an option. Oh, my face is blocking it there. To start recording a favorite. All right. What's up, Thomas Benner from Austin? How are you doing? Okay. So I'm going to start recording a favorite. Now, when I select that, this tells me a favorite is currently being recorded. Favorites let you record one or more operations in the waveform editor as a single command that you could access from the favorites menu, run on multiple files or as a batch. We'll get to that. You can capture operations such as applying effects, adjusting gain, inserting silence, adding fades, and more. Okay, now I'm going to get to the things that you can't do, but all of the things that we're doing in this case are effectively gain or effects based. So all of those can be turned into favorites. All right, so I'm going to click OK. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to come up to effects, amplitude compression, normalize. All right, and I'm going to normalize to, let's normalize to -3. And I already have it enabled here. We're going to DC bias adjust to 0. So we're going to remove any DC offset. Go ahead and do that. All right. Then I'm going to go up to effects. I'm going to go up to reverb. I'm going to go to studio reverb. And I already kind of created this preset in here. It's a take on the hall. If I wanted to do that or use a specific preset, I could grab it here and then make adjustments. But I'm going to go with the default in here. Click apply. Okay, it applies that. And let's go ahead and stop recording the favorite. And we'll call this -3 dB DC removal hall verb. Okay, and if we play this back now, okay? And if we look over in our amplitude stats, now we can see the peak amplitude is -3 dB, which is what we did in normalize. The DC offset, remember, we had some fractional plus 0.02 minus 0.01. That's been removed. And as you can hear and see, both in the waveform itself and in the spectral frequency display, we have the nice tail of the reverb here, which actually was perfectly timed to kind of fade right into silence. Okay, so because I have all of those other files, now I could take an individual file here, like let's say this snare 1, okay, so here it is. Now I can just come up to the favorites menu and I can individually run this. So what did we call it? I called it oh, it's right at the top here. So there it is, -3 dB. DC removal hall verb. All right, and again, we can scan this file here. Take a look at this one. So again, we're at -4.6, -4.2. Almost no DC offset, but we want to get rid of that anyway. Okay, and it's obviously a dry file. Okay, so I can individually run this just by going to the favorites menu, choosing the favorite, done. And you can see that reverb's been applied because now you see the spectral tail, right? Let's rescan. Okay. -3.01 decibels. Okay, for whatever reason, it was slight, but again, we're good. No DC offset. Play it back. Okay, sounds great. So I can do that individually, or I can use the batch process window to run this on multiple files very, very quickly. And our batch processing is really ridiculously fast. So what I'm now going to do is I'm going to take the rest of these drums, which again, just to kind of point out, they're all at varying levels. I'm going to turn off the sound preview here. I'm going to grab the rest of these in the project panel. I don't think I have any more in here. Nope, those are the rest. Drag all those into the panel. Okay. So when you go into batch process, first of all, there's a couple elements to this. So if I just zoom in for a second here, so make sure you can see all of this. Just pull this a little closer. So first thing it does, obviously it tells you the name of the file, stage, status stage is when it's processing, you'll see that. The original sample type. Now, we can choose to convert this. We're going to do this in a moment. We're not going to do that right now. Export name, again, we can modify that if we want, and then export location. and then export format. The reason you're seeing a format change here is because by default, you have, generally if you're batching, you're probably going to save as well to either make all those changes and then save it, or make all those changes and save it to something else, right? So you can enable or disable that as you want. And if you go into export settings, it's the same dialog. Now, in the case of all of these, because these were raw PCM, yeah, I would likely save all of these to a .wav or .aif. That would make a lot of sense. Put it into a more traditional format. But I don't have to. I'm going to disable the export. Now, while I'm at it, before I do that, I actually have a whole bunch of files, additional files from this set of snares that I want to bring in too. So in this case, I'm going to come up to the import dialog here, and I'm going to choose raw data. Now, if you are ever, again, you're probably not going to run into too many raw files these days. I mean, I suppose you could. It's probably not, but you could. But here's what happens. So I'm going to grab all of these, and you can see that Audition is seeing that these are Sound Designer 2 audio files. Now, we won't natively open SD2 by itself. You have to import them as raw. Okay. And by the way, if you try and do file open, it won't even see them. You won't. So you have to do it through the import raw data. Okay. So I've already imported number 1. Let's grab snare 2. Go ahead and open this. And when you do that, now this gives you this dialog. Now, again, as you can see, because I know that these are recorded at 50K, I manually typed that in. Now, we do have the menu of the more standard sample rates here. But, if this were, let's say this were, 52, not 502. Let's say that this was done at 52K. It lets me do that. Now, the key with opening up raw PCM data is you must know the attributes. If you don't, for instance, how many channels is it? Is it 1? Is it 2? Is it 6? And then the encoding type. Is it 16-bit? Is it 8-bit? Is it some of these? Oh, we don't even have, do we have ULAW, MLAW in here? Oh, we do, yeah. Is it ULAW 8-bit? We used to see a lot of these in telephony systems. We'd get recordings and things, especially when people would use Audition for sort of forensic stuff. To be like, do you guys support ULAW 8-bit ITU? Oh, yeah, we do. G711. So fun. I mean, I haven't even thought of these in 2 decades. We could always open these things and then work with them. So you need to know how it was encoded. If you choose the wrong bit rate, I mean, I can show you what'll happen. You're just going to get, it's going to be like horrible distortion, okay? And then you also need to know, anybody who's been in audio a long time, was it the byte order big endian or little endian? Endian, E-N-D-I-A-N, okay? Intel byte order, PowerPC byte order. Now, based on the date of when these were encoded, and I know that they were encoded into Pro Tools sometime circa 1995-ish on a Mac, I was 99% sure they were big endian, and indeed they were, because those were PowerPCs back then. So, but I suppose it could have been Intel, but these were done with big endian PowerPC byte order. Okay, and then you can also have a start byte offset. If there were an offset, that gets very ugly, because you can see it's actually a multiplier. So I pray you don't have to deal with that. But the key is you do need to know sample rate, channel, and 60 and the bit depth at a minimum. The byte order you can change. You have 50-50 shot of getting it right. Okay, so I'm going to open those. All right, and here they are. And let's go to. Just need to bring those in now. So here they are. Bring in all of these. Drop them in. Okay, I've disabled export. All right, I'm going to come up to the favorites menu in batch process. So this is one of the great features here, is that it lets you apply a favorite in the batch. -3 dB, DC removal, hall verb. All right. Let's go ahead and click run. It's already done. Okay. Now, technically, I could have converted to something else in that process as well. In fact, if you look here, you'll even see I have a convert to 24-bit. This is something I'll often do with 16-bit media if it needs to be treated or remixed or re-equalized, or basically any kind of effects process in general. Now, I probably wouldn't have done this with reverb as such, that being a sort of destructive-y type of effect. But as far as like a normalized DC offset, I would recommend if the files were natively 16-bit, do the DC offset correction in its native bit depth. And then if you're going to do additional amplitude adjustments, processing, convert to 24-bit or 32-bit float after the fact. No reason you couldn't convert to 24-bit and then do the DC removal, but I've seen instances where because it's not in the native bit depth anymore, maybe it works a little, maybe it leaves some behind. It's just do it at its native bit depth. And then if there's additional processing necessary, convert to a higher bit depth, okay? Roland Collenberg, DC offset is often also the cause of pop sounds and NLEs, correct? Oh yeah, absolutely. So if you have DC offset on audio and you're cutting between clips, and again, like you could even in some cases like apply a very small fade, but it appears that the audio is going past the direct current 0 line, so there shouldn't be any pop or click. You're still going to get pops and clicks because it's not at the 0 line. So again, even sometimes applying a fade, you're still, because the DC offset between the two clips may not be the same. So the 0 point is not the same. So yes, that's a great point, Roland. And that's something which a lot of people have run into and they're like, I can't, I'm fading. Why is it still there? I have to do a 4-second fade and now it makes no sense. DC offset. And the thing is, in Premiere, this is again why this is so valuable. Let's just do this for a quick second here. Let's say, let's just pretend I'm gonna do a cut. All right, I'm gonna do a cut right here and a cut right here. So I'm gonna make an individual little snippet right here. Let's say I've inserted this piece, and again, I'm getting this weird click thing in the transition, and I'm probably getting it. All of these probably have it, but my point is, I need to know why is that happening. So from Premiere, I can say, edit clip in Audition. All right. It's going to send that right over to Audition. Here's that little piece right here inside of the editor right here. A render. It's just curiously happened to be saying a render. And you can see the name of it coming from the timeline that it came from, audio extracted. I could run the amplitude stat scan, okay? And now again, there's no DC offset here, but if I had that, I could simply come in and repair it and just, I haven't made any changes, but here, I'll just make a change. Bzz, all right. Save it. And now when I go back to Premiere, it saves right in the timeline. So this is, I wouldn't call this dynamic link, but it is in the sense that you send it to Audition, you make a destructive change. When you go back, that destructive change is affected here in Premiere. Now the original sound is still, remember, it's an extracted piece. So the original is still in your, it still exists in the program in the project panel as the original full audio file that it came from. But now you have the non-DC offsetted version in the timeline. And you can subsequently do this for the adjacent clips or whatever very, very seamlessly, and it works. It works great. And it's super fast, as you saw. Obviously, if you're dealing with very, very long clips, it'll be a little slower. But in those cases, right, maybe that's something that you batch. You know, that would be like, all right, you know what? I'm getting a lot of clicks in between all these edits. I wonder, this can happen, especially if you're using, I've seen DC offset with, again, like weird wireless lavs that connect, you know, they have not a dongle, but you know what I mean. Some kind of a wireless dongle that feeds into a sound card. Maybe you're on set with like portable power. Current, weird stuff can happen. So be aware if you're running into those kinds of things, this is a really great way to fix it. And it's so esoteric. If you're not familiar, you're going to be doing a lot of tweaking, figuratively and or literally, on the audio to try and get it better, and it may not ever correct it. What I'm doing now would be destructive. Correct, Gino. Now, that said, too, if I had sent it over as long as I don't close the file here, it is and still does maintain its history. So I could, in theory, go undo amplify, resave it, go back to Premiere. Now, it's still an extracted piece in the timeline, but it's now not changed. And if I were to undo in Premiere the cuts, that would be again, the history here still exists as well. But yes, it is, when you send to Audition or edit clip in Audition, you make a change, you save, that is a destructive process, all right? Okay, very cool. All right, so we just did scripting, batch processing, DC offset removal, edit clip in Audition, snapping to frames in both. You gave me a little couple extras there, so that's awesome. Let's segue over to something regarding loudness. Oh, and by the way, now here, if we want, let's just preview all of these and let's hear what they sound like. Sweet. So they're all the same. They're all the same peak level. They're also all the same sort of relative loudness. All DC offset's been removed, and they all have that nice little Hall reverb that I stuck on them, okay? So super, super cool, really easy to do. All right, so this is something that came up earlier this week. I told you all I've been working on some internal podcasts with a couple of my colleagues, and the podcast is going to be going external at some point in the near future. And I've been helping. They found, well, we had an editor already working with us. I've mentioned her before here, Amy Ferrati. She's awesome. She's going to be taking over a lot of this for the external podcast as I am going into other things. And there was this talk about loudness matching and kind of applying loudness standard for podcast delivery, which for most services, Spotify notwithstanding, is minus 16 LUFS, minus 16 LUFS. And as we talk about, and we've talked about sort of some of the standards in Premiere, when you do the auto match audio in Essential Sound in Premiere, it typically will auto match everything to minus 23 LUFS, which is the broadcast standard. Minus 23, I think, is like the EBU loudness standard. Or maybe it's also ITU. Or maybe EBU is minus 24. I get confused. I forget. In any case, it's kind of the broadcast loudness standard is minus 23 LUFS for video, for television, for those things. For podcast, it's minus 16. So how do you do that effectively? How do you get something? Well, okay, so here's the question that I get asked a lot. I got asked this on Reddit not long ago too, or someone asked and I answered them. I need to get my audio to exactly minus 16 LUFS. How do I do that? Okay, well, that's not, the question is not exactly correct, because you can't be exactly minus 16 LUFS, because minus 16 LUFS is sort of the overall loudness relative to full scale. So it might be minus 16, minus 15.7, even maybe, plus 16.01, but it's not a peak level, right? It's the perceived loudness level over time. But that's what you're going for, is that perceived loudness. So there's a differentiation between peak, dBFS, loudness, LUFS, and then there's also dBTP, which is, you can actually see it's referenced here, which is the true peak amplitude, which is used in the LUFS scale. This is something else entirely. I don't need to go there for this. I'm getting going off on my nerd tangent. Let's keep it in line, Levine. All right. So how do we do this? How do we get our mixes to conform to, let's say, the podcast standard? You're doing a podcast, you're releasing a podcast, and you want to do that. Okay, it's very simple. So we have this panel called Match Loudness. It may look similar to Batch Process because it kind of is. Now, let me go ahead and open up one of the episodes that I have here. So this is one of the previous podcast episodes, already mixed, already everything. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop this file into the match loudness panel. All right. And when I do that, you're seeing that it's going to analyze all of the statistics. Now, actually, how the DC offset thing came up this past week was someone was asking, they didn't want to batch remove DC offset. They wanted to batch analyze DC offset. And this brought up a great, and Kevin, I don't know if you're still in the chat, this brought up a great, what? Sorry, have I had coffee today? It brought up a great question about why don't we have any way to batch analyze DC offset? Because if you look at match loudness in particular, where DC offset matters, remember I told you by having DC offset, it can actually limit your amplitude, or in some cases, clip and distort your amplitude. And it even tells you percentage of clipping. We have the ITU loudness, the total RMS, which again refers to the previous dBFS scale, peak, true peak, loudness, perceived, percent clip, but no DC offset. And if we go into amplitude statistics, peak, true peak, sample value, clip samples, RMS, loud, perceived, loudness, DC. So we're only missing like a few attributes that would be very, very useful here. I don't know why we don't show that. We should show it because it's relevant. And again, it's still common. So what this is telling us though is that obviously this is a little too hot for a podcast needs. So from within the match loudness panel, now you can match to something, or you can essentially conform a single file to a specific loudness level. So you'll see here that first and foremost, if you have a file that you're trying to match against, you can reference that here. So if we did match to file, it actually allows us to choose the open file in question. It was really cool. Okay. In this case, however, I'm simply going to go into my ITUR BS 1770-3. I'm going to type in my target loudness here. Okay. Now, as mentioned, just as in the batch process panel, note we have export. Now, this just saves you the step, right? I can do the work here, I can do the process here and then just file save. The other cool thing about this, if you do the export here, let me just show you, you'll note that you have same as source file location. So you can put your converted, changed, modified file in the same location. And if you're feeling adventurous, you can also overwrite the existing. Now, you may not want to do that. Many times you don't. So you can uncheck that. But it does give you flexibility there. Also note, we were talking before in the export for both batching, you can add prefixes and postfixes to the file name, which is very, very useful. Okay. And then you can choose all the various attributes. And then you can also choose to remove it from the panel, close the files, have markers and metadata, all that kind of stuff too. That's standard. All right. So if we wanted to export it, we could. In this case, we're just going to conform it to the target loudness. Go ahead and click run. It's going to process. All right. Yes, Kevin, do we need a DC offset category for this panel as a feature request? Yes, please. And I have to imagine the analysis is coming from the same place, right? I mean, it's already there. All they literally have to do is there's a feature flag. It's like turn on, or maybe not. Maybe there's no UI for that column, but that's all we need. That would be so useful. I'd even argue to the super audio nerd. I mean, maybe because it doesn't show. It shows percentage of clip. Oh, interesting. Right. It shows clip percentage, but not the samples clipped. So, okay. I think percentage of clip is actually more relevant. Nobody works in samples. No, nobody. Who works in samples? And I'm tell me if you're deal at sample level. There was a time I used to show editing at the sample level, because Audition used to, you can zoom in. These little dots. These are individual samples, and I used to show how you can modify the individual samples. Nobody does that anymore. There's just no reason to edit at the sample level anymore. I mean, there was a time, but not really. Only exception, he says, would be if you're doing a very, very, I mean, again, even for a fade, I mean, you're not going to be doing a 5 sample fade. You could. It's just uncommon, So yes, maybe for a fade in, fade out. Again, as we were talking about DC offset, it matters in the DC offset world, the sample level. But again, that's another problem. If you've got a clean file, you're almost never going to work in samples. Bezier those dots. Yes. Okay. So anyway, as I'm rambling on here, we've got about 4 minutes. Now you can see our ITU loudness is -16. Okay. All the other attributes of this file, no clipping. And if I were to rerun amplitude statistics on this file, oh, whoops. Here's our previous, right? So we were at -11, yeah, -10.51 before. Let's rescan. Okay, again, just to get the complete value here, and DC offset 0%. And if we look at loudness, on the money. But you got it to exactly -16. Well, yes, but again, if you want to see how that works, we're not going to get into it now. If you go into your effects rack here and you add something like, what is it in special? The loudness radar meter. And set this to, there's no -16 LUFS in here, so you'll just have to modify the settings in here. But what you effectively, play this back and you'll understand how it's capturing LUFS. And I saw somebody was asking, what's the difference between LUFS and dB? So again, it's 2 different things here. Decibel units relative to full scale, okay? Which is, again, decibel units versus loudness units. Just a different scale, okay? Different measurement. And in the case of ITU LUFS, we're talking perceived overall loudness. Okay. All right. Henrik Heigl, good to be here again. Nice to see you. Okay. So let's see. We've got just a minute or 2 left. What else to show? What else have I got? Maybe I end a little early for a change. Let's see. What else did I have on here? That was kind of it. I showed opening raw files. Oh, yeah. So this is just one other additional thing here. I know I've shown this before. Generating noise, generating tone. Now, just to be clear, this is not like room noise, room tone. This is, I said we don't have virtual synths. We don't have synthesizers. But you can generate the standard types brown, pink, white, gray noise. And this can be useful, if you're wanting to, let's say, you're handing this off to someone who's going to mix and you want to just give them, I don't know, reference levels at the beginning of your audio mix or something. You want to generate noise. Why would I put a DC offset on there? I don't know. You can do that. So let's see. What's our intensity here?
It's like to change systems, and so with that,
so you can see how it generates white noise there. Again, we're doing this on top of this file. Let me make a new one real quick just to kind of show you. New audio file, 48K mono. That's fine. Go into generate noise, and you have white noise, pink noise, brown noise, lower amplitude there, and gray noise. If you want to see what gray noise looks like, because it's a little difficult to hear audibly, again, you can see where the bulk of that energy is below 60 hertz and then above 21K, all right? Which is why you weren't hearing anything. But if you were in here, you were slightly feeling something rumble. And my friends, that is all the time we have. So just a couple of quick, cool, very, very useful hidden gems in Audition and Premiere Pro. Thank you so much for tuning in. Have a great rest of your morning, afternoon, evening, wherever you are in the world. And we'll see you again next time. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.